At 9:47 a.m. on March 18, 1944, near the shattered outskirts of Anzio, Italy, a German recovery unit dragged an intact American half-track into a temporary field workshop. The engine was still warm, the treads were caked in Italian mud, and inside the cramped command tent, Ober-Engineer Carl Schmidt, a mechanical specialist trained in the precision factories of Daimler-Benz, received an order that would change everything he thought he knew about this war. Open it, understand it, report back. No battle orders, no urgency, just one simple instruction. Schmidt had done this before. He'd inspected British tanks after Dunkirk, Soviet trucks captured on the Eastern Front. They were crude, predictable, inferior machines built by inferior minds. But this time, something felt different. When Schmidt pried open the engine compartment of the M3 half-track, he didn't smile. He didn't scoff at American incompetence like he expected to. He froze, because what he was looking at wasn't just impressive, it was dangerous, and not in the way anyone expected. By 1944, German engineering stood at what it believed was the absolute peak of human precision. The Tiger tank, the Panther, the Panzer IV, each one a masterpiece of mechanical perfection. Thick armor, tight tolerances, exquisite machining, every component fitted by hand, every weld inspected 3 times. A single Tiger tank required over 300,000 man-hours to build. 300,000 hours, that's 34 years of continuous work by one person. German factories weren't just factories, they were temples, temples of precision, temples of perfection. And American factories, they were a joke. German intelligence reports repeatedly described U.S. vehicles as mechanically crude, overly simplified, designed by accountants, not engineers. To men like Schmidt, American machines were temporary tools, disposable garbage. Germany built machines meant to last a century. America built machines meant to be replaced next Tuesday. And yet, by early 1944, something didn't add up. Despite the Luftwaffe bombing their convoys, despite U-boats sinking their supply ships, despite the sheer distance across the Atlantic Ocean, American vehicles kept appearing, and not just appearing, flooding the battlefield in numbers that made absolutely no sense. Half-tracks destroyed in the morning were replaced by evening. Trucks blown apart on Monday were back by Thursday. Tanks obliterated in combat reappeared as if they'd never died. It was impossible, and yet it kept happening. So German High Command issued a new directive: find out why. Not on the battlefield, under the hood. Schmidt leaned into the open engine bay of the captured M3. At first glance, it disappointed him completely. The welds were rough, amateur hour compared to German standards. The bolts weren't polished, nothing was perfectly aligned. German vehicles were symmetrical, balanced, beautiful. This thing looked like it was assembled by drunk farmers. Schmidt scribbled in his field notebook, "Construction appears careless, excess clearance everywhere, quality control questionable." Then he looked closer. The engine mounts weren't custom fitted like they would be on a German vehicle. They were interchangeable. The same bolt size, the same spacing, the same pattern repeated across the entire frame. He removed one component, then another. They came off too easily. No specialized tools required, no precise alignment needed, just basic wrenches, standard sizes. This wasn't sloppy engineering, this was intentional. Schmidt paused as his wrench hung in midair because he'd just realized something that made his blood run cold. In German factories, parts were married to their machines. Each component was hand-fitted to its specific vehicle. You couldn't just swap a fuel pump from one Panther to another. It wouldn't fit properly. But here, these parts were strangers. Any bolt could fit anywhere. Any component could be swapped into any vehicle. The engine itself surprised him even more. A white 160AX gasoline engine, roughly 147 horsepower. By German standards, pathetic. Low compression, low refinement, crude castings, loose tolerances. But then Schmidt noticed something that made him stop breathing. This engine could run on low-octane fuel, fuel that would make a German engine seize up and die. Its tolerances were deliberately loose. Its components were oversized on purpose. Why? Because it was designed to survive abuse, dust, poor maintenance, incompetent crews, teenagers who'd never seen an engine before. German engines demanded trained mechanics with years of experience. This engine didn't care who touched it. A farm boy from Kansas could keep it running with a hammer and a prayer. Schmidt wrote in his notebook, "Engine sacrifices efficiency for reliability, accepts imprecision, forgives operator error." To a German engineer, that sentence felt wrong. It violated every principle he'd been taught. But on the Eastern Front, where engines froze solid and seized in the cold, this design would keep running. It wasn't elegant, it was forgiving. And in war, forgiveness matters more than beauty. Schmidt moved to the frame. Cast parts instead of machined ones. Stampings instead of milled steel. Germany avoided casting for critical components, too unpredictable, too variable, too imprecise. America embraced it. Why? Because casting was fast. A German transmission housing required 6 hours of precision machining on specialized mills. The American version? Poured into a mold, cooled, drilled, installed, done. Schmidt calculated the assembly time, then recalculated, then checked his math again because the number seemed impossible. A single American half-track could be assembled in under 8 hours. 8 hours. Germany needed days for equivalent vehicles. Not because Germans were slower, not because they lacked skill, because they refused imperfection. The Americans had done something revolutionary. They designed their vehicles around their factories, not the other way around. One part could fit 10 different vehicles. 10 vehicles could be repaired with one crate of spare parts. German logistics demanded precision. American logistics demanded volume. Schmidt underlined one sentence in his notebook twice. "This machine is not built to be perfect. It is built to be replaceable." The final blow came when Schmidt found the repair manual inside the vehicle. He opened it expecting complex technical diagrams, detailed specifications, mathematical formulas. Instead, he found cartoons, simple illustrations, step-by-step pictures, instructions written at a 6th grade reading level. If engine won't start, check fuel line here, with an arrow pointing to a clearly labeled component. To replace track, follow these 5 steps, each step illustrated like a children's book. An American farm boy who'd never seen a half-track before could learn to maintain this machine in an afternoon. A German repair manual required an engineering degree to understand. Schmidt closed the manual slowly. Around him, the workshop had gone silent. Other engineers had gathered, looking over his shoulder. Nobody spoke, because the truth was becoming impossible to ignore. Germany built weapons for experts. America built weapons for armies. And armies were large, very, very large. Schmidt did something German engineers were trained never to do. He imagined the machine breaking, not in a laboratory, not under perfect conditions, but in mud, in rain, under artillery fire, with half the crew dead and the other half terrified. The American half-track had exposed components, open access panels, bolts you could reach with frozen hands wearing thick gloves. German vehicles hid everything behind armor plates and precision-fit panels. You needed the right tools, the right training, the right conditions to repair them. The Americans had designed this vehicle assuming it would break, assuming it would be mistreated, assuming the crew would not be experts. So they made it easy to fail and easy to recover. German machines demanded perfection to function. American machines expected chaos and planned for it. Schmidt wrote, "Design assumes operator incompetence. This is not an insult, this is strategy." Another engineer, Fritz Keller, entered with crates recovered from a destroyed American convoy. Spare parts. They laid them out on a workbench, and immediately something felt wrong. The same carburetor fit the half-track, a GMC truck, and a light tank variant. Same bolts, same thread sizes, same electrical fittings. In Germany, each vehicle had unique components, specialized parts, custom fittings. In America, one part served many machines. Schmidt whispered to Keller, They don't build vehicles, they build ecosystems. And that meant something absolutely terrifying. If one factory was bombed, another could replace its output immediately. If one design failed, the entire system didn't collapse. German industry was fragile precision. American industry was redundant power. Schmidt compared production timelines. He'd personally overseen Panther tank production. He knew the numbers by heart. Panther tank, 150,000 man-hours minimum. Half-track, a fraction of that. While German engineers refined one machine to perfection, America finished 10, then 50, then 1,000. Schmidt realized something that made his hands shake. Even if German tanks were tactically superior, and they were outnumbered before the battle even began. The war wasn't being decided at the front lines. It was being decided on factory floors, thousands of kilometers away. And Germany was losing that war badly. Schmidt examined the crew compartment. Simple seats, clearly labeled controls, no unnecessary instruments, everything designed for speed and simplicity. German vehicles required months of training. This half-track? Weeks, maybe days. The Americans assumed soldiers would be young, inexperienced, and replaced frequently, so they designed machines that forgave mistakes. German philosophy demanded the soldier rise to meet the machine. American philosophy lowered the machine to meet the soldier. And in total war, that mattered more than pride. That night, under a dim oil lamp, Schmidt typed his findings on a weathered Olympia typewriter. He chose every word carefully. This report would travel to Berlin, to officers who believed Germany was still winning. He wrote, "American vehicles display no individual brilliance. Their strength lies not in components, but in the systems surrounding them. Interchangeability, standardization, simplified training, rapid production. Replication is theoretically possible, but practically impossible under current German industrial structure." That last sentence was damning. Germany could not copy this, not because they lacked the skill, but because their entire economy, their training systems, their cultural values were fundamentally wrong for it. You couldn't improvise mass standardization, you couldn't rush an industrial ecosystem, and you couldn't redesign an entire nation in the middle of a war. Schmidt leaned back in his chair. For the first time in the war, he felt something close to respect, not for American weapons, but for American thinking. They hadn't asked, "What is the best machine?" They'd asked, "How is the fastest way to keep fighting?" And they'd built everything around that answer. Germany built masterpieces. America built momentum, and momentum wins wars. Schmidt folded the report into an envelope. He knew most officers would ignore it. It contradicted everything they believed about German superiority. But deep down, he understood the truth. The war was no longer about steel and firepower. It was about systems, supply chains, training pipelines, replacement rates. And Germany was fighting the wrong war with the wrong tools against an enemy that never stopped building. Even if Germany tried to imitate American designs tomorrow, they couldn't imitate American scale. Germany faced skilled labor shortages, fragmented suppliers, over-specialized factories, and perhaps most importantly, ideological resistance to inelegant design. American engineers were allowed to be practical. German engineers were forced to be perfect, and perfection is slow. Mass war doesn't reward perfection, it rewards consistency. By late 1944, the numbers told a story no propaganda could hide. Germany, fewer tanks, fewer trucks, fewer replacements every month. America, tens of thousands of vehicles, constant resupply, endless momentum. Battles weren't lost when a tank exploded. They were lost when no replacement arrived. Germany ran out of machines. America never did. The half-track Schmidt inspected would eventually be scrapped, but thousands more rolled off assembly lines that same week, and the week after that, and the week after that. Schmidt survived the war. His report never changed Germany's fate. By the time Berlin understood his conclusions, it was already too late. But his words explain something we still forget today. Wars are not won by brilliance alone. They're won by what can be built, repaired, and replaced faster than the enemy can destroy it. Germany asked, "How do we build the best machine?" America asked, "How do we build enough machines?" The difference was subtle and fatal. The American secret wasn't armor, it wasn't firepower, it wasn't engineering genius. The secret was systems thinking. America didn't just build tanks, they built supply chains, training pipelines, repair doctrines, standardized parts, and industrial ecosystems. A Sherman destroyed today could be replaced tomorrow. A Tiger lost today might never be replaced at all. German factories were masterpieces. American factories were weapons. And in the end, the factories won the war.